Now, this year in 2022, we commemorate the 10th anniversary of the International Day of the Girl. In these last 10 years, there has been increased attention on issues that matter to girls amongst government, policymakers, and the general public, and more opportunities for girls to have their voices heard on the global stage. This morning, we are going to be talking to the UNFPA Head of Office and Liaison Officer for TNT, Mrs. Aurora Noguera-Ramkissoon. Mrs. Ramkissoon, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on Now.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show, Mr. Souza. I'm pleased to speak to you today on behalf of UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund, the UN Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, and my Executive Director, Dr. Natalia Cannon.
Now, Ms. Ramkissoon, I want to get straight into it because the significance of International Day for the Girl. Can we speak a little bit about that?
Yes, the International Day of the Girl Child, which is globally observed on October 11th, was first observed in 2012 by the United Nations to focus attention on the need to address the challenges girls face and to promote girls' empowerment and the fulfillment of their rights. The 1995 Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action set the tone for this day by providing a framework for advancing the rights, not only of women, but also for girls. This year's commemoration actually marks 10 years, as you mentioned, under the theme, Our Time is Now, Our Rights, Our Future. UNFPA has taken the opportunity to focus this year on the issue of child marriage, including early unions, which are non-formal marriages or what we call common law marriages that occur predominantly among girls and their adult male partners. UNFPA, along with its UN sister agency, UNICEF, have been leading the charge globally to end child marriage and these early unions, which we'd like to bring attention to during this international commemoration of the girl child.
Yeah. And of course, how do you see this being significant for us here in the Caribbean, even closer in TNT?
For the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago in particular, this issue is also very pertinent given the existence of child marriages and in particular early unions, early sexual initiation, which make girls more vulnerable to these early unions, as well as economic inequalities and social norms and behaviors that promote inequality between males and females that particularly put girls at risk of abuse. From consultations held by the government of Trinidad and Tobago and civil society prior to the amendment of the Marriage Acts back in 2017, we note that girls were disproportionately impacted by child marriage with male partners, in most cases, who were adults. This evidence prompted the Hindu Women's Organization of Trinidad and Tobago to lead the campaign and petition to end child marriage. Now, while child marriage has ended in Trinidad and Tobago, early unions or common law arrangements among girls and men still exist, and not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but in the Caribbean at large. And many of these situations arise due to inequality, a desire by parents or the girl to be in an improved economic situation that the adult male may offer. And this also occurs when there are a lack of investments in the girl child. Hence, UNFPA's focus on investing in adolescent girls so they could successfully transition from adolescence to adulthood.
Yeah, because my next question was also going to be why the focus on the girl child. But I think that you would have wrapped that up in terms of making that transition from a healthy girl child to adolescence. And so as we look at the changes that has been taking place, what are some of the setbacks you would see in this movement as we allow these girls to grow into adolescence?
Well, I think particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw more and the restrictions placed, the stay-at-home measures. So oftentimes, some of these girls were left in the home in abusive relationships. So we saw increases in reports of abuse, particularly among children, both boys and girls, but more prevalence, of course, among girls. We also see with the persistence of these gender norms that foster inequalities, girls may have had to take on more traditional roles of cooking, cleaning, caring for their siblings and family, facing, additional barriers to pursuing their education, particularly for poorer girls who may not have had access to devices to connect to, say, online education. So these are some of the barriers, I think, particularly with the stay-at-home measures placed by COVID-19 that we see some of our girls have faced.
How do you think girl children in particular can get their voices heard more on a global scale? Is it through organizations such as the UNFPA, or are there other organizations that girls can align themselves with to have their voices heard?
Well, I think we work in partnership with government as well as civil society. So there have been a lot of efforts on behalf of both government and as we mark the loss of our female leader, Ms. Hazel Brown, she was really a key advocate and the network of NGOs of Trinidad and Tobago for the advancement of women, looking at issues of inequality and the advancement of the rights of girls. So I think by our continued partnership with organizations such as the network of NGOs and government in particular, the Office of the Prime Minister, Gender and Child Affairs, the Ministry of Education, we could try and promote this successful transition, including the Ministry of Health.
Yeah. Now, it's been 10 years. In 2022, we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of the International Day for the Girl Child. Looking at what was before and 10 years now, what are some of the major accomplishments you would say that girls have, achieved during this 10-year period?
Well, in addition to the change nationally of the marriage acts, we see more women involved in leadership position in politics, in the private and public sector in more leadership positions. We see women advancing in sports, in a number of non-traditional areas from fields of engineering, construction, science and technology. These are areas where we haven't seen many advancements, but we're now seeing further advancements of our women and girls, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago and the larger Caribbean.
Yeah. Now, as it relates to gender, there is a conversation taking place about, people becoming more acceptive of certain genders. There are also teenagers who are now becoming a bit more fluid as it relates to gender. As we have the International Day for the Girl Child, does the LGBTQI conversation fit into that anywhere, or will the rights still protect them as they look at how their genders are also changing?
Well, I think we're looking at the issue of addressing inequalities, right? So trying to level the playing field for all in the country, all in the world. So despite what your sexual orientation may be, we're looking at issues of equality. And the day particularly focuses on the girl child and the barriers that girls face in making that transition from childhood and to adulthood, because they particularly face a number of risks and globally a number of human rights abuse. So it's important that we invest and address structural inequalities to ensure that smooth transition for the girl child and for all of our adolescents.
Yeah. And as we look toward more days such as this, do you think that the International Day for the Girl Child also feeds into the International Day for Women when we're also celebrating women as well?
Yes, and we also have coming up this 16 days of activism to eliminate violence against women and girls. So I think it fits in quite appropriately as we, as a world and as a nation, concentrate our efforts to end violence against women and girls, because early unions, child marriage, are one of these practices that are part of gender-based violence and contribute to the further exploitation of women and girls.
Yeah. And Mrs. Ramkissoon, can you just share with us quickly some of the projects that have been taking place at the UNFPA's office?
We have a number of projects that we've been supporting with government and civil society. One major project is the Spotlight Initiative, largely funded by the European Union to address the issue of family violence. Not only is UNFPA involved, but we have our other UN sister organizations such as PAHO, UNICEF, UNDP, and UN Women. And we're all working together along with government and civil society to put an end to gender-based violence. We're also working on the issue of trafficking, working closely with the counter-trafficking unit at the Ministry of National Security, UNICEF, the International Organization on Migration, to prevent and respond to this issue of trafficking. We're working closely with the Canadians to address issues of access to sexual and reproductive health, particularly amongst the vulnerable groups in Trinidad and Tobago, ensuring that they have access to maternal health care in particular. We're working closely with the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Midwives, and we also hope to work very closely with the Equal Opportunities Commission to address issues of sexual exploitation and abuse, particularly at the workplace. So there are a number of related projects, and we appreciate the support from our donors and the partnership that we have with government and civil society, because only together can we put an end to gender-based violence and these harmful practices.
Yeah. Ms. Ramkissoon, one more thing, as you would have mentioned, is sex trafficking. I know that some girl children may be part of that vulnerable group, but do you think displaced girl children, for example, those among the migrant population, are they more vulnerable to certain ills, I would say, than others?
Yes, we have certain populations, including the migrants, in the country who would be subjected to human trafficking, and some who may or may not have been trafficked because of their immigration status at times makes them more vulnerable in respect to accessing services. Some may not come forward because of their immigration status. Some may have language barriers, and may not even be aware that services exist that they can tap into to improve their overall well-being. So yes, we have migrants, we have young people living with HIV who are also vulnerable, as well as some of the poorer members of our society who may not have the capacity or knowledge to know about these services that do exist, including young people with disabilities.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mrs. Noguera-Ramkissoon, let me thank you so much for joining us here on the Now Morning Show. Quickly, I know we're almost out of time, but tell us just one of the services that they can access. Is it that they can reach out to the UNFPA office, or are there other services that they can access if they need assistance?
Well, there are a number of services, and we, again, thanks to Spotlight Initiative and our other donors for supporting us. I'd like to particularly acknowledge the hotline at the Family Planning Association of Trinidad and Tobago, where they can be routed to sexual and reproductive health services,
Right.
as well as the hotline at OPM Gender Affairs if you're facing sexual or other forms of gender-based violence. These are all services that you can tap into and be routed to other needed services that the person may require. Thank you for having us on the show, and I appreciate sharing some of the work that we're doing at UNFPA.
Of course, and we appreciate you, Mrs. Noguera-Ramkissoon, so thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that was UNFPA Head of Office and the Liaison Officer for TNT, Mrs. Aurora Noguera-Ramkissoon, just sharing some information as it relates to the International Day of the Girl Child, which was commemorated on October 11th.